What's up, NHL fans? Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Morning Cup of Hockey alongside Colby Cohen. I'm Jonny Lazarus, and we are presented by Betway. If you're going to place a bet on Betway. Please play responsibly, and remember, you must be 19 years of age or older. Please like and subscribe to the Daily Faceoff YouTube channel. It really helps us. It goes a long way for this show as we now gear into the Stanley Cup Final and into everything surrounding the summer and the offseason. It's going to be big for Colby and I's contract year, our contract negotiations. We got a lot of things coming up, a lot of things planned. Just like today's show, we got Frank Seravalli, NHL Insider, hopping on here shortly. But our focus for the most part of today is going to be the Dallas Stars. We didn't really touch on them yesterday on the show, and obviously they were eliminated over the weekend. But they're one of those teams that is knocking on the door. They're right there. Their core is intact. They got some tweaks they're going to have to make over the summer. So we'll talk about those things. Yeah. But Colby, anything on the top of your mind right now this morning?
No, look, I think, I did see some comments yesterday from people about how we haven't mentioned the Florida Panthers. And, sort of our plan is to sort of, as we get closer to Thursday, we're going to spend, a full day looking at the Panthers, a full day looking at the Edmonton Oilers. But there is a bunch of news right now. And there's been a bunch of reports all over the internet, whether it's Frank, whether it's, some of the other insiders that have been reporting different things. And there are some intriguing topics to look at on top of the fact that, the Dallas Stars and where do they go from here? And I think it's funny because I think there's some decent similarities between the Dallas Stars and the New York Rangers, as far as being right there, being a team that we've now been talking about for the last couple of years, being a team that has some decisions to make with their roster, and some big decisions. We've look at, the way that they're built. We look at their leadership. They've got guys like Jamie Benn who are coming up on the last year of their deal. Jake Ottinger coming up on the last year of his deal. They've got some big UFAs. What happens is Joe Pavelski retiring. So there is a number of looming questions for Jim Nill and company in Dallas. And, I do feel like Dallas kind of quietly is always going about their business. They're not really a team that sits in the news, we hear about, I guess. They're pretty good. I don't think they're an organization that leaks a ton. So yeah, we'll definitely spend some time with that today. We're waiting for Frank here to join us any minute, in the next minute or two, because there are other things that I'd like to get into with Frank. He mentioned the other day on his social media that he wouldn't have been shocked if, Marty Necas got traded before game one, which means in the next couple of hours, really. Frank's also been putting out his trade targets boards that has started for him. And then obviously as we get closer to July 1, Jonny, the free agency boards will start coming out. So it's actually
Colby, Frank did on May 24th put out his top 75 pending free agents.
Okay, so that he'll continue, and he'll continue to update that as guys get signed or we hear about parting of ways. I mean, there's I would say there's been an unusual amount of news around the game right now. Normally the NHL likes this to be a quiet period and all the focus being on the Stanley Cup Finals. And before Frank comes on, I can't not ignore the fact that the Brady Tkachuk rumors before Frank comes on, because I know this is one that is probably a little touchy for you.
Not really.
We can ask
I don't see any realistic possibility.
We can ask Frank if it's even a realistic thing, and if Brady Tkachuk is quote unquote available. I think the guys at Spit and Chicklets might have started that rumor, so we'll bring Frank in and we can ask him about that. And I guess seeing what Matthew Tkachuk did a few years ago, I guess nothing should surprise us with a Tkachuk. But as we say good morning to our friend Frank, and we appreciate you jumping on, Frank. I know this is a unusually busy time of year because you're juggling free agency, you're juggling trade targets, you're juggling travel for the Stanley Cup and all of the above. But I was just asking Jonny this because I know this is emotional for him. Is Brady Tkachuk actually a player that the Ottawa Senators aren't just hanging the phone up when teams are potentially calling about?
No, I believe they are hanging up the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't even entertaining this idea, Colby.
Actually,
that's not true.
I have a million questions to ask,
Okay.
including why would this be emotional for Jonny?
Well, because Linda Cohen yesterday was tweeting that the Rangers needed to make a play for Tkachuk. And, I said to Jonny, would you be willing to part ways with Keandre Miller and Lafreniere and maybe, a top prospect for a guy like Brady Tkachuk? And Jonny said absolutely not because of his emotional attachment to Lafreniere. And it just
called loyalty.
If you're asking me what the Rangers need to get over the hump, look what Florida did. I mean, that's all I'm saying. And so that's why I'm asking you, Frank, because I would think the Ottawa Senators would just say, click, not available.
That is what I'm told they're saying. And here's what I'll add, though, is you mentioned the Matthew Tkachuk part of this. Another front-facing guy playing for a Canadian team that ultimately at some point said, hey, this is it. I've given you 7 years and I'm not re-signing here. When it comes to Brady, he's obviously already made the long-term commitment to the Sens. He is the captain, and I think he wants to be part of the solution.
He has 4 years left also on his deal, Frank.
However, what I'll add, and thanks, Jonny, for reading Cat Friendly. What I'll add is I'm sure at some point he's going to be tired of losing. And if that team doesn't get it together in the short term, that he's going to say, hold on a second here. I committed to winning. I committed to seeing the other end of this rebuild, but I didn't commit to interminable torture in the NHL standings. And that part I think is totally fair. And I could see that conversation coming at some point, but I don't think we're there yet.
Mm-hmm. So completely off the table. Let's put a rest to these rumors. Is that kind of what you're feeling?
Yes.
For now.
Okay.
For now.
But it's fun to play the hypotheticals unless you're Colby Cohen. He hates the hypotheticals.
Well, I think you have to at least acknowledge at some point that it isn't working, but they're also still really early in the tenure of the next regime, right? All Brady Tkachuk has ever known had been the Pierre Dorion era. And now there's a new owner, there's a new manager, there's a new staff, new coaching staff. Like, you have to at least give that a shot. And I think he's certainly open to doing so. But if, this is my read on the situation, if that doesn't work, if they don't show signs of promise and progress, that I think then we're having a different conversation.
Yeah. Just to switch gears a little bit, Frank, Colby and I started the show talking about Dallas, talking about their comparison to the Rangers. I know the timelines might be similar, but I actually think Dallas is in a better position. And I'm curious if you agree, just because kind of going through the roster and looking at the age of their players, like one thing that I noticed and said earlier in the year for the Rangers was that their forward group specifically, we've talked about the core and the prime age of an NHLer. And Colby and I have kind of said like 24 to 29, right? Colby, it's like, that's like the prime ages of a player, right? Around there. Mm-hmm. So you look at Dallas and the Rangers. Okay. So first the Rangers, the only 24 to 29-year-old that they had going into the season on their roster was Phil Peedle. That changed with the addition of Roslovic and whatnot, but Dallas, like they're guys. They got Rupe Hintz, who's 27, Jason Robertson, who's 24, Mason Marchment, who's 28. And then they do have some younger guys like Johnston and Stankoven. But, those three guys to me, like are right there in their prime. And those three guys are huge pieces. I mean, specifically Robertson and Hintz. The Rangers forwards, to me, they're like sort of on their back nine. And I know Dallas has a lot of players like that too, but I'm curious just with the way the rosters are constructed, which team you feel like is in a better spot right now?
Well, it's a good question. And the common thread that ties both those teams together is that they went out with a whimper in the conference final. Definitely surprising on both ends, I think. Watching those series play out the way that they did, that the Rangers couldn't get more of a foothold against Florida, that Dallas was basically the wheels fell off after that Game 4 comeback from Edmonton. And to answer your question about which team and spinning it forward is in the better spot, I'm really torn because I think when you talk about the elite parts of their team, I think Shesterkin has a clear edge over Ottinger, and he's right in the heart of the prime of his career, and also due probably a really expensive next contract.
At the same time, Frank, 20 million comes off the books between Trouba and what's his name, Panarin.
Yeah, but like, how different are the Rangers without Panarin?
100%. Yeah.
And I saw some of the consternation. I saw some of the criticism. You can't win with guys like Artemi Panarin in the playoffs. Like, I think that's absolute nonsense. If you can win with Nikita Kucherov, you can win with Artemi Panarin. And I'm not saying that because they're both Russian.
I don't know. I feel like we've debated that a bit on this show.
Well, look, we spent an entire show yesterday talking about the Rangers.
Yeah. So let me talk about the Stars then. I think they're in a great position because what they've been able to do, and one thing that we're going to see is whether or not guys like Lafreniere and whoever is part of that next generation below that prime, do they have the goods to take over and pull on the rope once the older crop begins to age out? And that's what Hintz and Robertson and that group have done. But now it's turned over even further where it's Johnston, Stankoven. Next year it'll be Maverick Bourque. And they're picking up the pieces, and they've done what's the hardest thing to do in pro sports. They've done the rebuild on the fly. That team was dead in the water, as recently as 2017, 2018. The Sagan-Ben era was ending. They weren't really sure what it would look like moving forward. And they were bailed out with maybe the best draft class from one team in one draft in NHL history.
Yeah. Frank, you mentioned Jamie Benn. He's coming into the last year of his deal in the 9 million mark.
Obviously, it's about surviving, getting to the end of the Ben and Sagan deal.
Well, Sagan still has a couple of years left, but Jamie Benn is up. This will be his last season. Is that a situation where, because he's the captain, he's been there his whole career, he's a drafted player, do you think they're going to approach him this year and see if, he's got to be about 30, I want to say 34 years old, 35 years old. I think him and I were the same draft.
He turns 35 in July.
So he might be 1 year below me. He might be a 90 birth year, but
are they going to way below you too? Why is he still playing? Why aren't you playing?
He's a hell of a lot better than I am. Anyways, are they going to try to lock him in, or is this the kind of thing that you think will linger? Because is that distracting to have your captain unsigned? I mean, is he the type of guy that's going to be quiet about that? I mean, he's always been a guy not afraid to sort of voice his opinions. We've seen him battle with some coaches over the years.
We just saw with Stamkos too, Colby, this year.
Do you foresee that being something that lingers, Frank, or do you think, they go to him and they try to get him to sign a little, maybe 2 or 3 year bridge deal at, I don't know, a 50% pay cut?
84 picks after you, in case anyone was wondering.
I'm aware that he was far after me. Thank you.
I would say no. I'd be very surprised. I think he turns next year is his 35-year-old season. This year these last 2 years have been really good, but he had really struggled for a bit. And I think my guess is they'd probably be pretty concerned about how he ages, and
plays heavy, hard and heavy.
He does. And
they don't age well.
Typically not, but also he wasn't very effective to me watching him, especially in round 3 against the Oilers.
Yeah. His speed seemed to have caught up with him in that round.
The whole team looked like they ran out of gas.
Well, look what they had to do. Look at the mountains they had to try to climb, and look at the battles they had early. So that's one question on Dallas. What about Duchesne and Tanev? Like, where do they go with those two guys? Because I mean, look, I don't think Tanev had a good last couple of games of the series. I thought he was
obviously
actually
hurt.
Thought he was actually bad, but yeah, clearly we know he was dealing with something. But are those two players that they're interested in bringing back, or are those guys that probably got too much value with the way that they performed in the latter of the season and the playoffs, and they're going to go get paid elsewhere?
Well, I think the Tanev question in an odd way is more interesting than the Duchesne one, because what really showed in the playoffs was how much depth Dallas was lacking on the back end. The fact that they had Alex Petrovic play the last series after 5 years exclusively in the AHL, that's tough. They traded a first round pick to get Nils Lundqvist. He clearly lost trust to the point where if Chris Tanev couldn't go, they were going to go with first round pick Leon Bichelle to make his NHL debut. So Dallas needs, I think, certainly more support on their back end. Ryan Suter really struggled when it came to the back half of the playoffs. And I would seriously investigate trying to sign Chris Tanev. I think he's probably going to be one of those guys that, even if you think or thought at some point during his year in Calgary that, hey, this is a guy getting closer to the end of the road, someone's going to give him a 3 or a 4 year deal. That's just how the market's going to play itself out. When it comes to Duchesne, I don't think he's necessarily the read that I got from him in conversation a couple months ago now on the Frankly Speaking podcast, was that Dallas has been such a good fit that he'd probably consider, foregoing some market value to have that stability and fit. That said, I think the big question from the Stars' perspective goes back to, Johnny, what we were just talking about, which is you get a full season from Stankoven, you get a full season from Maverick Bourque. Can Stankoven and Bourque, like, let's look at Duchesne, and they have another pending UFA up front whose name is escaping me. And you take those two guys and you go, Pavelski. Sorry. What's up with Joe Pavelski in his career? Those two guys scored 65 goals last year, 60 goals last year, 50 some goals at least. That definitely both of them were in the high 20s. 50 some goals and 120 points. Can Stankoven and Bourque replace that? Or do you need more? Do you need at least one of those pending free agents back plus more?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's kind of unknown. Like if you ask me what I think about that, I'd say that's a big risk. Stankoven comes in like halfway through the year this year. And when you come up halfway through the year and you get rolling quickly, it's different than going through training camp, making the team, going through preseason, and then playing a full 82 games. So while I do think Stankoven is going to be a really good player, I don't think rarely does the guy go like this. It's never like straight up the mountain. Mm-hmm. There's usually a little bit of dips and valleys in that second year, Johnny. So
he came in even later than halfway. Colby.
Wyatt Johnson didn't do that.
And I would say he's probably more the exception than the rule. So maybe Stankoven would be another exception. But I do think over time, we've seen that with a lot of young players who come up midway or later, have a really good run, and then struggle out of the gate, and then refine their game, but struggle at times as they kind of come back in. Do you get the sense, Frank, that Joe Pavelski is potentially retiring? I mean, he's pretty old, but he did have a pretty good regular season. I know playoffs was, not quite there, but
our guy Ryan Clark had a great story yesterday on ESPN.com about Joe Pavelski. It's hard for me to see a guy like that walk away just because to get that close again. This team has made 3 conference final trips in the last 5 years. It's that elusive Stanley Cup, and some guys never get their hands on it. Few guys age as well as Joe Pavelski has. But listening to his teammates and how emotional they were. And Tyler Seguin said, no, like, can we not talk about Joe? Like, I don't want to do that. And Pete DeBoer has obviously coached Pavelski for a long time, going back to San Jose. The way they answered those questions, it made it seem to me like this was the end. And his play had certainly, you compare this playoff to the previous playoffs for Pavelski. You compare even this regular season and his impact. Yeah, the points were there, but he didn't have the same opportunities. He didn't have the same juice. I would lean towards him not being back, but I don't think you can ever truly count out someone as dedicated as Joe Pavelski in terms of his want and willingness to keep playing.
Yeah. And Jeremiah, Johnny, had a good comment in the chat about how maybe he does what Parise does, takes first half of the year off and then comes back, save himself from having to play 82 games next year. Although that doesn't
seem like something Joe Pavelski would do.
It was just, but it's
he's either all in or all out. I think.
But in thought, it's not a bad idea, Johnny.
No, definitely not. But again, like with Pavelski, he's I don't want to say. I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I don't want to discredit Zach Parise, but I feel like Pavelski is still more impactful.
Way more.
Right.
I said no one has aged like Joe Pavelski.
Yeah.
I'm making the joke because no one's aged more poorly than me. But how many guys go from 31 points to then as a 37-year-old 81?
Yeah.
It almost never happens. That's why I pointed out the story from Ryan Clark.
Well, and
he said that Jim Nill asks all of his prospects, like, when you're coming into training camp, are you going to be stronger than Joe Pavelski? Are you going to win more battles than Joe Pavelski? Are you going to do all these things to try and take someone's job because Joe Pavelski is the standard bearer in Dallas?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday was funny, Frank. We were talking, or Vic was looking at like just the age of everyone in Dallas, and he was like, "Oh, Chris Tanev's probably over the hump. He's 34." And then he goes, "Wait, I'm 34." It was a pretty funny revelation from Vic. Sorry, Colby, you were going to say something?
It is odd, I have to say, because when I first started covering this league, I was the same age as some of the youngest players. And now all those guys half of them are retired and the other ones are on their way out. And now I'm like, okay, I guess I'm the old guy now.
Yeah. Frank, let me ask you another question about this Dallas Stars team. Jake Ottinger, you look at Dallas's regular season and what they had committed to the cap in goal. $4 million to Ottinger, and they had $1 million to Scott Wedgwood. And Scott Wedgwood had a really good season for them. I mean, he's going to get a raise. Wedgwood is one of these guys that I would say he's like a premier backup type of goalie where that if your guy goes down for 4 weeks, you're not going to be out of the playoff race because of Wedgwood. He can play.
He actually did exactly that. Remember, Jake Ottinger missed a month.
So Wedgwood's going to get a bump, a well-deserved bump. And Ottinger's an RFA in 25-26. So he's got 1 year left on his deal. Ottinger
and Shesterkin they're in the same exact situation, but in slightly different tiers. Ottinger's in the next one down.
Exactly. Where do you see that situation going? Because is it advantageous to try to lock Ottinger up right now where he probably didn't have his best showing and his value is probably slightly lower than if you were to let him play the first half of the season? Because he's a really good goalie in the regular season, and then he becomes good in the playoffs, but not necessarily great in the playoffs. There's a little bit of inconsistencies, and he's a BU guy, so I'm BU on BU crime right now, which I hate to do, but I do think that is something that you have to pay some attention to.
I think you try and get him locked up as soon as you can. And I think you hope that it's as reasonable as possible. What gets the deal done for Jake Ottinger?
8 years at 6, 5?
No, it's going to be way more than that.
Okay, so closer to 8, you think, huh?
Yeah, I would say somewhere in the 8 times 8 range.
Wow.
That's just a pure spitball off the top of my head.
Yeah. So that would mean to me then that Swayman would be closer to 9 because Swayman is a tier above.
Yeah, Swayman's in the Shesterkin category probably.
I'd say, man, that's a good question because I know what the numbers are. Swayman, 132 games, 919. Ottinger, And it's not just as simple as that, but he's 193 games. So 60 more games at 913.
And 60 more games is almost
that's a big sample size that could work against Swayman in the sense that you get exposed for 60 more games.
Right.
That it's a different number.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say Swayman, you could make the argument as slightly more, but it's not going to be by a ton. Like, I don't think the difference between Swayman and Ottinger is really all that great. Right. I know what the numbers say.
Right. No. And look, I think
I don't think that people view Swayman as in that same category as Shesterkin.
Yeah, I agree. I think because Shesterkin plays way more, and I think Swayman we're having a little bit of recency bias with.
I agree.
Which we do, and that's fine. But I try to zoom out a little, Johnny, with that kind of thing and think.
For me, it's 7 guys that are in the top tier: Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin, Demko.
Wow, you're keeping Sorokin in there?
You don't think he's in there?
Not after this year.
Yeah, but Johnny,
he's the only reason they made the playoffs.
What do we always talk about? Is that when you have a large body of work, we know who you are, and then you get to have a down year. It's when you don't have a large body of work and you have an up year is when I always say you need to prove it more. Like Lafreniere, he needs to prove it again next year. He's now had 1 year of proving it, where if a guy's proven it for 4 and 5 seasons and they have a bad year, well, I still got to think they're who they were for 4 or 5 seasons and not in their slump. So I would also keep Sorokin in that top tier, but I would put Jeremy Swayman in that tier, but to the bottom of that top tier.
Can I ask you a question, though, about, I mean, not to get totally off topic, but with Sorokin and Patrick Waugh, like Patrick Waugh has somewhat made it clear that Varlamov is his guy. No?
Well,
am I crazy for saying that? Like, I don't think that's automatically Sorokin's job next year. I think that's a battle.
I don't agree with that. I think Sorokin is a far superior goaltender. Vic,
I'm not saying I disagree, but
quiet yourself down in the chat. He's not going to Toronto. Enough of that. So we'll see. It's going to be a year.
Who else is in that tier? Saros. So Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin, Saros,
Demko,
Hellebuck is 6.
Are you putting Bobrovsky in there?
Hard not to right now. You know, I think Bob probably falls into, you know, with Ottinger and Swayman, although look, Bob's been really good, but I also just don't think he sees the same level of pressure. It's not his fault. He doesn't see the same level of pressure as any other goaltender. Mm-hmm. The long story short, though, is that there's going to be a lot of goalies are up right now. Like, we're about to see sort of a new standard set for what goaltenders are going to be getting and what they're going to be looking
I disagree. For. I think it's actually the opposite.
I saw a report that said Shesterkin was looking for like 10 to 12 million. No chance that happened.
It was 12. What was 12. The report? 12.9 or 12 something? 12.
There's no chance he's getting $12 million. No chance.
No.
I think goalies are now going to start falling between $7 and $9.5 million is what I
honestly think we're due for a huge market change. Like, how many teams went this year with value goaltending? More than a few. They took the Cam Talbot, you know, let's take David Riddick and whoever else is in that group.
But it didn't work. How many teams did it work for?
Okay, so hold on a second. You say it didn't work. Where did the LA Kings finish in save percentage this year, Colby?
I have no idea.
You want to guess?
Just tell me.
4th.
Okay, but how did the LA
finish in the playoffs?
How did the LA Kings fare in the Stanley
Cam
Cup
Talbot
playoffs?
Wasn't the reason they lost in the playoffs.
Listen, but
you're arguing with the wrong guy here, Frank.
Igor Shesterkin is a massive reason why the Rangers are a couple goals away from a Stanley Cup final.
That's because the rest of the team didn't show up. And that's the same thing that I would say about the LA Kings. The rest of the team didn't show up.
Look, you and we've had this argument and we never agree on it. I think goaltending being a value proposition is a dangerous game to play. And I know teams are doing it. I just don't agree with it.
So, okay, but I think there's a blend is my point. Like, if you're going to go to the far extreme like they have with Talbot and Riddick, that's another story. But I also think devoting 10 million plus to your goaltending tandem is a mistake.
Yeah. That's why I said I don't think a guy's going to get 10.
Why can't you find two guys that you can pay $3 million to each and find a happy medium that you'll get close to, maybe not the elite save percentage or the elite goaltending in the playoffs, but those guys are hard to come by.
Right, but I'd rather 10 out of 10 times I'd rather commit $9 million a year to Igor Shesterkin and know that I have Igor Shesterkin or Vasilevsky or the guys
you need mentioned. The little security blanket. You need your Snuggie.
Listen, yeah, I want my Snuggie. Absolutely. I'm building my team from the back end, including the goal on out. And
dude, it's so easy to say congratulations that's what you want to do. But if you take over a team and you don't have it, how do you get it?
I understand that, but I'm just saying, if you're asking me to choose between $2-3 million goaltenders like and Shesterkin or one of the or Demko really or Hellebuck, even though I know Hellebuck, I like knowing that like when push comes to shove come playoff time, like I've got my guy who's going to be unbelievable and bail my team out and take us maybe further than we should go.
So then let's take some modern day examples then, like right now. Okay. There's two interesting scenarios that come to mind for me. The New Jersey Devils. You've got tons of goalies available this summer on the trade market. And then also the free agent market is no good this year. It's Samsonov, Talbot, and Brossoit, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm looking at your list.
It's kind of it. The trade market, though, you've got Ullmark, Saros, Markstrom, Philip Gustafson. You've got a whole crop of guys that are all available. Gibson on the trade market. If you're the New Jersey Devils and you're Tom Fitzgerald and you've never gotten your goaltending right at any point in your tenure, who's your guy? Who are you trading for? And what are you giving? Like, what are you willing to give up to get yourself your Snuggie?
Yeah. So I think, Ullmark would be a target, and I think Gibson would be another target. I think all the guys you just mentioned are all good.
Why Gibson? Like, honestly, why? I don't understand.
I've always liked John Gibson. I've always had a thing for him. I've always thought he's, been completely hung out to dry. I think that, when you
maybe he's just completely average.
I'm the only person in the world that watched the Anaheim Ducks play for a couple of years when Shaddy was playing there, and I was living in Chicago, and the games were not. I was probably one of 17 people watching those games, and night in and night out, I would be like, "Wow, this guy's talent is being completely wasted." So I've always liked John Gibson. I just always have.
Sub 900 the last 2 years.
Well, I mean, you look. He
played 53 games, not this season, the one prior, and gave up the most goals in the league in just 53 games.
Again, the stats are
also
the stats.
30,
but
30 years old.
I'm just saying. You're asking me
who
who I like.
Makes $6 million a year.
Which I think is a good number for him. Where like Jacob Markstrom, I'm not
as familiar with. It's been untradeable at $6.4 million the last 3 to 4 years.
I mean, I think I remember at one point we thought his time there was done.
All these guys are like 30 plus years old,
but
too.
I don't see Markstrom as much.
Goalies last longer though. Like goalies can play till 40.
I don't see Markstrom play as much, but really, I think any of those guys, Frank.
You want to let Jonny in on all the guys that played into their late. Marc-Andre Fleury's about to play his 40-year-old.
Who's winning cups right now that are like north of 35 plus?
Bob is got to be 35. Yeah,
he win a cup
2 in a row. He's 2 in a row.
He's won 2 Vezinas though, and this is his second straight trip to the final.
Who's the last goalie to win a cup? Like 35 years old
in September.
I'm just actually just wondering. Well, I have to look that up after, but I don't know who the last goalie is that was 35 plus to win the cup.
Yeah, look, I don't think any of the guys you just mentioned though, Frank, are my Snuggie. That I think that's probably my point.
So UC Saros is not he doesn't fall into that category for you?
You know what my problem with him is that he's small. Yeah. I don't like small goaltenders. I like big guys. I like big goaltenders. Thatcher Demko, if I have my number one. Listen. Yeah, I know. Go ahead. I like him big, Frank. So I like big fucking goalies that take up a shitload of net and they're athletic. And when the shooter comes down on them, they're thinking, where am I shooting? I'll never forget a moment I had against Carey Price in my career, as I had a great scoring opportunity against him in Montreal, coming down off the right point. It was like a low to high one-timer pass. And I honestly double clutched the shot and tried to actually go around the net and go for a wraparound because he was so big and so square that I'm like, where am I shooting this puck? And so I like a big 6'2", 6'3", or bigger goaltender. It's one of the reasons I love Thatcher Demko.
So aren't you then making my point for me, which is if I were the New Jersey Devils, which I'm not, instead of going after one of those guys and paying a high acquisition cost, I would try and go mid-tier, and I would try and get Gustafsson from Minnesota, who's available, who 2 years ago had a .933 save percentage and was looking like the guy. But the Wild have Fleury, and Fleury can mentor Jesper Wallstedt, their first-round pick from 2021. And Gustafsson is available for a team that desperately needs to find cap flexibility, 3.25 or 7.5, whatever Gustafsson is. I would take him for the mid-acquisition price and say between Gustafsson and Jake Allen that those two guys could be enough for you as the Devils. All you have to do is get to league average. And I know you say, oh, well, what are those guys going to do in the playoffs? Like, how many teams have we seen go on runs using guys like that in net?
Well, who has? Because, who has gone on runs with guys like that? I think because Skinner's elevated his game. And if you look
Did you guys see the Colorado Avalanche win a cup with Darcy Kemper? Up 900.
But look at their back end. And you could say that about Vegas, but look at their back end. So are you going to have a completely stacked best decor in the NHL? Because the two teams we just said, Vegas and Colorado those years had the best defensive cores in the NHL.
My only point is this. I think it's unless you have Hellebuck or Vasilevsky or one of these true top end guys where every single year they're in the Vezina conversation. I think paying your tandem as a total with the way the cap is structured anywhere approaching or north of $10 million is a mistake.
All right.
And so let's say you go out and get Saros or you get Markstrom or whoever. Markstrom at $6 million plus Allen at 1.9 is 7.9. That's entirely reasonable. I just think paying a huge premium, and maybe the Stars could get Ottinger at 8 and they have Wedgwood at 1.75 and that's 9.75. Maybe that fits. All I'm saying is I'd like to try and keep it in a formula. And my thought process leans way more towards the Carolina Hurricanes or some other teams that have done it this way, which is you can get close enough in a position where it's voodoo. Goaltending is voodoo. You have no idea what you're getting from one year to the next with these guys. I'd rather have $3 to $6 to $7 million spent total between my two guys, and maybe even have a good third guy that's waiting as an option for my team moving forward.
Certainly one way to look at it. I would, the last thing I will say is I can't wait to see how the LA Kings goaltending tandem does next year without a 1-3-1, because their players have all come out and said nobody wants to play in that 1-3-1. So let's
oddly enough, they kept the same coach and now they still need a goalie.
So Frank, let's pivot. I know this has gone a lot longer. We started with Dallas. We ended up talking goalies. There's a couple other things that have gone on in the last couple of days, things that have been out there. And I want to focus a little bit on Carolina and for two reasons. I want to know what's going on with their GM search, and I want to know what's going on with Marty Necas. I know you had a tweet recently that things, could be happening behind the scenes. And then, there's been some reports about Jarmo Kekalainen potentially in Carolina. There have been weird reports that the new GM isn't going to be the guy in charge of hockey decisions. Like, can you just shed a little bit of light into what's happening in Carolina overall, please?
Well, my understanding of the situation is that right now they're proceeding with Eric Tolsky as interim GM through July 1st. And then they're going to conduct their search after the fact. I think they're in the very beginning stages of looking at external candidates. And I think Tolsky running the ship for now is going to give the Hurricanes some key insight onto how he might, if he were to be the guy that ultimately gets the job. And in the meantime, I think they're just monitoring the market. It's a really interesting role in terms of how Carolina and owner Tom Dundon views it, because my thought process is that they are leaning towards someone that can basically execute a game plan that they're handed. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, the way it's worked for the last few years with Don Waddell, who of course has had an opinion, the final decision maker there is the owner. And most teams do not work like that. So the owner is consulted on everything, and then he makes the call, and then Don Waddell goes out and executes the deal. So can this next person operate?
So like, you mean, can I just ask you, just because I want to clarify that statement a little. So like trade deadline, we want to go get Evgeny Kuznetsov.
Tom Dundon's making the decision.
Are you okay with that? Yes.
No.
Okay.
Tom Dundon's like going through the whole exercise of, hey, Justin Williams, you played with Evgeny Kuznetsov. Tell me what that's like. Hey, stat guys, tell me.
He's in the room. He's in the room on deadline.
He's at the table in the room and in every meeting.
Do you see that as problematic, Frank?
No.
Okay.
He owns the team. He can do whatever he wants.
Well, him being able to do whatever he wants and asking if you see that as problematic are different.
Well, no, because he's obviously a really smart guy, and the team, since he took over, has the second most wins in the league. And I think there was a huge learning curve that he had to delve into to educate himself on how exactly things work. And I don't think he knows everything. So he relies on the people that are in front of him to help inform those decisions. But when it comes to ultimately pulling the trigger, yeah, Rod Brindamore has a huge say. Hey, we want to go out and get Kuznetsov. Don Waddell has his opinion. And so he kind of takes all those things and then says, okay, let's go trade for Kuznetsov. And then Don Waddell goes and does it.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Frank, just one thing.
So hold on. Just need to finish that part of it off. So what they're looking for, I think, is someone to come in that exact same role, which is, hey, this isn't going to be GM in the traditional sense of the word. You're not going to be sitting there concocting ideas like you will be and bringing stuff to the table, but it's going to be our call collectively as a group, and you're going to go out and do that for us. So that's not something that everyone wants to do. That's not a role that everyone wants to work in. And by the way, my understanding is, and this isn't a knock on Tom Dundon, he's willing to pay a lot less for this role than a lot of other people would, because he doesn't see this as the traditional, all-important, all-powerful decision maker that everyone else views the position as. So it's not really a traditional GM, so to speak, that they're looking for. It almost feels like they're looking for someone that's going to be the face and do that publicly, and then also be making the calls to managers to go out and do that. Now, why, if all those things are true and you already believe in Eric Tolsky, who can and has been already making the inputs to that system for the last 6 years, why would you then go out and feel the need to do that? I guess we'll know by the end of this month whether or not he does feel like he needs to do that.
Does a guy like Gensel get signed before the month's end? Like, is that something, or will that have to wait until a permanent GM is?
Eric Tolsky has full decision-making power right now, meaning like within that group.
Right, within the scope.
He's negotiating with agents and free agents. They're pending free agents. He is the point person on Marty Necas talks. Like he has full autonomy with Tom Dundon, right there. right now to be able to execute all these things that the Carolina Hurricanes need. And so to answer the Gensel question, they've had really positive talks, is my understanding. But I think he's come this far in a contract year and is like, I loved my time in Carolina and I could always go back there if I wanted to, but I might as well see what the market looks like in 28 days.
Got it.
Frank, my last thing, and I know this has been such a big talking topic, but have we ever seen anything like what's happening with Mitch Marner right now? A player who is so beyond a point a game in his career and has performed in the regular season, not in the playoffs, but won't waive his no move clause, and it's clear
we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, like that. That's what we said. That for now.
And if anyone were to like, and look, I'm not knocking any of my competitors or colleagues, but if someone actually had, this is what we would call in the business, hard news that Mitch Marner is not going to be waiving his no trade, that would have been the biggest headline going. It's been soft pedaled and soft played for a reason, because no one can really say definitively, because the Leafs haven't gotten there yet in terms of actually having that conversation. And all they have to do is just make it a little bit uncomfortable. Hey, we're not re-signing you. We have no plans on ever re-signing you. And whether you have already done it or whether it happens, this is all they have to say, is whether it happens now or next summer, you'll have played your last game as a Toronto Maple Leaf. Does Mitch Marner, like, I get the idea of like talking tough and saying, hey, we're going to stand behind our no trade clause because we negotiated that right. But does anyone actually think it's advisable, if a player is known that he's not wanted, to then go out and play a contract year, especially in that city?
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at. Has there ever been an experience like that ever?
I'm sure there is in the history of the game.
But with a player of that magnitude.
But I think Frank's best, like, I think the biggest thing here, and I know we were getting into this last night with Vic, because Vic is such
Vic's like bench him for the year.
First off, you're not just going to put him in the stands for 82 games.
Yeah.
I don't think you can legally do that. I don't think the Players Association would allow.
There's no way you
couldn't legally do that. Now, if he plays bad, you want a healthy scratch him for a game or two, that's different. But
like, no one's thinking it's going to get to that point either.
Right. And that's the thing is that, like,
they're all going to have to come to peace with it if that's what happens.
What else is Darren Ferris, his agent, supposed to say right now? We're like, you say the right things until there's actually something real to say, until there's something tangible.
Which is why the breathless reporting to me is nonsense. And I try not to do it, because
I'm happy you clarified it.
Why make 6 updates before the actual, like, you'll hear from me when there's news to share.
Yeah. And you're always kind of that's always been your mentality, Frank, since I mean, obviously I've known you forever, but that's always been your mentality. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. I think right now it's June. The
Leafs are still trying to make some decisions. Right. They're trying to internally, hey, what is the stance we're going to be taking? And then this whole idea of like the Marner camp isn't interested in a negotiation. So what?
Everyone's always interested in
make
negotiation.
Sense of that. So he wants to stay and wants to be a Maple Leaf, yet he isn't interested in a negotiation.
Look, I think I agree with everything you're saying, Frank. I think the biggest area you and I kind of part on is that I think this is going to be incredibly difficult to get done. I don't think it's as sort of, I'll tell you why, because his cap hit, his playoff production, you look around who has room for a guy like that. You look at places that are desirable versus non-desirable. I think all of those are factors. And I know you're rolling your eyes.
I'll just give you 7, because Matt Larkin is going to post this piece shortly. I can think of 6 teams off the top of my head without really even trying hard that would make sense.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Carolina, Utah, Chicago, Nashville, Seattle, Buffalo. You could probably make an argument for the Kings or Dallas. Like, I mean,
and how many of those would you say are desirable locations? Do you think Mitch Marner wants to go to Chicago? And
I'd want to go and play with Connor Bedard
and be bad for and be on like one of the worst few teams in the league next year.
The point is, you're going to sign an 8-year deal at some point, or at least a heavy 5-year deal. You're going to be there, part of the fabric of the team. You're not just, it's not a 1-year decision in time. Does
Also
anyone
less
think the
pressure
Chicago
probably on
Blackhawks are
him.
going to be bad? Like, I'm going, wait a second. Wait, I could go play for another Original Six team in an unbelievable place to live and ride shotgun with Connor Bedard? Hey, whose shot might actually compare to Austin Matthews in this league? Connor Bedard. Do you think I can put up 100 points next to Connor Bedard? He got 50 some out of Philip Kurashev this year. I'm sorry. This is not hard. Stop being an apologist for everyone else.
I just think
you,
it's hard.
But this whole idea of like, oh my God, what are we going to do? How could we possibly win this trade? I don't understand how, like, you could get $11 million off your books and get real assets in return. Where's the loss here?
But again, he controls it. He can veto anything he wants. Like he
can, but then you got to make life difficult and turn up the heat and say, we don't like you.
You know what though? But he has enough track record.
You can't sit with us.
He has more leverage.
Colby, put yourself in his shoes as a player. Put yourself in his shoes. If the team comes to you and says, we don't like you and we don't want you, do you really want to stay there?
You know what? Again, it's no, you don't want to stay there, but you also can sit there and say, I can collect my $11.5 million. I'm still going to play. I have an amazing track record of putting up shitloads of points. I'm going to get paid. And then I get to choose where I want to go.
Okay. So let's say you stay. Let's say you stay where they don't want you. And we're playing this out hypothetically. So in case someone wants to clip this and try and radio it, let's just say you stay and you have an absolute shit year. You drop from 100 and some points to 60 because you can't get out of your own head about playing for a team that doesn't want you anymore. How's that going to work out?
I don't know, Frank. People overpay free agents. They overpay them every year. They pay him more money and more term than they're worth. He has
the same team acquiring him now, if that's really what it's all about, can do the same thing. They can
get him for nothing. But instead of giving up your top prospect and giving up a number one type of defenseman or player or whatever the ask may be, I think you're wrong here. I really do. I don't agree with you here. And
this is not rocket science.
It is more difficult than you think it is, in my opinion. I think it's a lot more difficult.
I think there's enough teams interested with enough intriguing situations that from both ends of this doesn't, like, I'm sorry, going to Chicago is not an undesirable situation. Going to Utah in a new building, new market with a team that's on the rise, that's not San Jose, I could say
an unknown situation. I would say Utah. There's unknown there.
Okay. So what if like the Kings or Dallas, two of the other teams? What about the Preds? Like, are you going to tell me that the Preds, a playoff team from this year, that's a crap situation to go to?
That'd be an awesome situation.
Great place to live. They'd pay you. You'd be the star in the market. I mean, what are we talking about?
Go to Nashville in a heartbeat.
This is the National Hockey League. It's not the Toronto Maple Leafs Hockey League. There's not one team. There's not only one team.
Free agents, they sometimes they want to be free agents. If they're not getting that 8-year extension in their own market, unless they're doing a sign and trade type of deal, which again, that's another thing.
It's not the Greater Toronto Hockey League. I promise.
Let me ask you a question. Is he willing to do a sign and trade? Because look at the difference in what the Maple Leafs will get back with a sign and trade versus a trade. What team is going to give up massive assets to get him for 1 year? Any of those teams
that's going to have to be part of any conversation.
Which is why I think this is more complicated than it is.
I don't.
Frank, let me ask you one last question about this because we have to wrap this, and I will make this presented by Parasso. So this last question about Mitch Marner is presented by Parasso, the most complete choice for shaving and beard care, made in Italy since 1948. Parasso has been a staple of Italian culture and barbershops globally for 4 generations. Get 15% off at Parasso-USA.com. with our promo code Hockey15 in all caps, Hockey15. Last question about Mitch Marner, because I have to get to the Rangers breakup day. Their exit interviews start at 11:30. But if you are Mitch Marner and you want to play in the playoffs again next year, where would you want to be the most out of every team that you listed? Where would you want to go if you could pick?
if I want to play in the playoffs next year,
Yeah. Like not this coming year, the year his contract is up.
Carolina.
And I would say Nashville.
Okay. I would agree with Nashville as well.
You don't think the Hurricanes are making the playoffs?
No, I do, but I'm saying where would you rather go?
Yeah, like I'd rather I'd rather live in Nashville.
I think Nashville's the best balance of everything.
Not to mention Tennessee's no income tax state.
I love Carolina. I don't know.
Okay. Well, Frank, we really appreciate your time this morning. I know we definitely jumped around a lot of topics. Also, Vic just wrote he doesn't want to play in the playoffs, which I love Vic's commentary.
Yeah, we already knew that.
Yeah.
So.
He's going to go into the playoffs for a new team and perform.
Maybe he will. Frank, and if you're sitting there scared, and if you're the Leafs and you're thinking about that and like, oh my God, what happens if he does it somewhere else? Who cares?
Yeah.
That's he wasn't going to be doing it with you, so it doesn't matter.
Agree. That I totally agree with. So
Frank,
all right, Frank, we do
appreciate
it. We kept you for an hour today. Sorry.
It's like your girl leaves you and gets married to someone else. Like, good luck. That's your problem. Have fun.
What if you still love her?
No.
Jesus.
Of course. Johnny's going to breakup day at the New York Rangers today. And I asked him, are you going to pop the question? Are you finally going to ask Loff to hang out? That is the biggest question. Johnny said he had a
I did.
Dream.
I actually
had a dream that at Rangers breakup day, Alexis Lafreniere said to Johnny, I can be a 100-point player in this league. That's what he's dreaming about, Frank.
True story.
We'll leave you with that. We'll leave you. You are awarded no points, and at no time were you even close. All right, Frank, go ahead.
Yeah,
Thank you for doing this today.
Please go. Yeah, thanks, Frank. All right, we jumped around there. But we hit a lot of good topics, I think.
Let's just wrap. Colby, shut up about Marner. Man, Marner brings out a lot of emotion in people. I do get that. Jerry, I just think this is going to be more difficult. I hope it works out for you guys, though. I want the Toronto Maple Leafs to be good. I say this about big market, big influential teams. So I hope they can make a big trade. I hope the Marner thing goes wrong. If I'm wrong and it happens in the next 2 weeks and it's the easiest transaction ever, I'll admit it. I'll say I was wrong. I said I was wrong about Edmonton. I'll say I was wrong. Loft swiped right on Jonny on Tinder from
Colby. My mom just texted me, I love your dreams.
I love your dreams. There is no more supportive mom than your mom. I will say that. I can tell you this. I don't think my mom has ever once listened to our show. So, Karen, you're a legend for listening every morning.
Love you, Mom.
What'd you say?
Said love you, Mom.
Do you have to go out to Westchester today, or is it MSP?
Can we hurry this up, dude? You've been fucking talking about Marner for half an hour.
Well, listen, it's something to talk about, Johnny.
We got tomorrow.
Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Florida Panthers. Tomorrow, we're going to get into the Florida Panthers. Tomorrow, we're going to go deep on their roster. Thursday, we're going to talk about the Edmonton Oilers. The things we didn't talk about today, we didn't talk about the Alan Walsh tweets about the CBA. We'll save that, for as we get into the Cup and we have 2 days between games. We'll because that is a really interesting point. The CBAs, we're 2 years away from the CBA expiring. And there has to be, something's got to give with this luxury tax hard cap. The league is healthy, so hopefully that's going to change. The other news that we've seen soft news on, I like how Frank says hard news versus soft news, is this new Major League Hockey thing that's happening. We'll wait till we have more clarity and more details. Right now, it's so speculative, so we're not going to weigh in on that whole thing until now, or until we get more concrete, conversation about it. And then we'll finish today's show, Johnny, with Betway, and we'll take a look at who is the favorite potentially for Conn Smythe. Betway still offering the promotion of a free $200 bet. Join, use the QR code on the screen, create an account. It'll load up your account. Make your bet. If it doesn't hit, you'll get reimbursed up to $200. So bet as much or as little. It's a one-time deal. For this Betway promotion, available only outside of Ontario. Please play responsibly. And we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to look at the position, the positions, odds to win the Conn Smythe. A forward at minus 331, a goalie at plus 375, or a defenseman at plus 700. So quickly before we wrap this show, throw us in the chat what you think. Do you think a defenseman could win? Who do you think's going to win? Johnny, I will ask you this question as the clock strikes 10, and you're going to get out of here in the next 90 seconds or so. What do you think? Who do you see right now as the favorite? And could you get good value on plus 700 for a guy like Evan Bouchard?
Well, I think it's obvious that you should not go with a forward at minus 331. There's no point in doing that unless you think someone, or I guess two guys maybe are a lock. To me, there's no lock right now. But if I'm talking about defensemen, I think Bouchard's obviously the one to go with or to lean on. We brought up Forsling yesterday. I don't think they'd ever give it to him, but if he shuts down and slows down McDavid and Draisaitl, and he puts up a little bit of points, it's a long shot, obviously. But if I'm really picking one here, I'm picking goalie, and it's Pavelski. Florida beats Edmonton. Edmonton's offense obviously is very high octane, and if Pavelski can shut them down, there's a really good chance that he wins it. So I would look at the goaltending.
Listen, what about Skinner?
Skinner's he's not getting it, dude.
But listen,
he's not getting it.
If Edmonton were to win the Stanley Cup, that means Skinner had an unbelievable series. There's good value there. That's all I'm saying. There's decent value in making a small wager on a goalie to win the Conn Smythe at plus 375. There's good value there.
I think if Edmonton wins, there's no way Skinner wins the Conn Smythe.
But what if he stands on his head? I agree, because you think it has to go to McDavid, or I get it, or Draisaitl. Yeah. But listen, if they win, that means they got insane goaltending. The only teams that have come close to beating Florida in games is because of insane goaltending performances, right? Like, Florida's the machine. So I think there's good value there. And State of Survival, people are talking about Forsling. Forsling is probably the unsung hero, but he won't win the Conn Smythe. There's just no way he's winning the Conn Smythe. He's not sexy enough, right? They're going to pick Barkov, Tkachuk, not Verhaeghe, but Reinhart, one of the sexier names, most likely Tkachuk or Barkov. So, all right, we're going to end the show here. Johnny's got to get to break up, or potentially the beginning of something new day for him, because you never know. Maybe him and Loff are going to go to dinner tonight. We just don't know what could come of today, so we'll be expecting to hear how it goes tomorrow. And we'll see if you get any good sound bites. I know you're going to ask Lavi some good questions. Put their feet to the fire a little, Johnny. Don't go easy on them.
This is my first breakup day. I'm curious if from your experience, is it all podium stuff, or do you get locker room
Every team is a little different, honestly, the way they do it. I think the Rangers, it depends on how big the presence is there. Yeah. But you should ask them what they think about the comparisons to the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's something you were talking about on our show yesterday.
Hit the end button.
All right, Johnny. Look, thank you to everybody in the chat. Yeah. I'll take us home today, Johnny. You guys were good. A lot of energy in there. I know we went all over the place. Goodbye to the Dallas Stars, at least until July 1st. Great season for them. It really was. We said goodbye to the New York Rangers yesterday. Tomorrow is going to be about the Panthers. Thursday is going to be about Edmonton. We'll see if any news comes up between now and then. Good job to our producer, Vic, today. Johnny, get yourself out to Westchester. Make sure you don't text and drive. And we'll see everybody tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., all right?
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Seravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.